She was not rich. She was not powerful. She was just a mother, living in a small town where each day felt like a test of survival. Her house was simple, her clothes were worn, and her cupboards were often empty. But her heart carried a heavy treasure, the lives of her children who looked to her for everything. Their voices filled the air each morning, asking the question that haunted her most. "Mom, what's for breakfast?" She had more children than she had food, more needs than she had answers, and yet she kept moving because mothers don't get to stop. She learned to stretch half a loaf of bread into 2 meals, to water down milk so every child could at least taste it. The neighbors sometimes offered small kindnesses, a bag of flour, a few biscuits, a piece of fruit. She always thanked them with a smile, but when the door closed, her eyes filled with tears. Deep inside, she knew that tomorrow the hunger would return. Tomorrow the struggle would begin again. Tying her worn shawl around her shoulders, hunger had kept her awake most of the night. She left the children in the care of a kind neighbor, kissed their foreheads, and whispered promises she wasn't too sure she could keep. "I'll bring food tonight." Her footsteps echoed on the dirt road as she knocked on door after door. At the first house, she asked if they needed help with cleaning. The woman at the door shook her head. Again, a firm no. House after house, the answer was always the same. By midday, her strength was drained, and shame pressed down on her chest. She sat for a moment under a tree, whispering, "Lord, am I invisible? Can't they see I just want to feed my children?" But silence was her only reply. After a few minutes, she stood again, wiping her face, determined to keep going. When she finally returned home, the neighbor who had watched her children met her at the gate. She smiled gently, but her eyes were tired. "I have my own family, too." The word struck her like a stone. She nodded, thanked her, and gathered her little ones into her arms. As she closed the door behind her, the house felt heavier than before, emptier, darker. That evening, when she thought the day's troubles were finally over, there was a knock at the door. Her heart jumped for a moment. Maybe a neighbor had brought food. Maybe someone had remembered her children. She wiped her hands on her skirt and opened the door with hope flickering in her eyes. But it wasn't kindness waiting for her. It was the landlord. His face was stern, his hand already outstretched. "The rent is due," he said flatly. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She begged, "Please give me just a few more days." But he shook his head, unmoved. Rules were rules, and he would not wait any longer. Inside were the last coins and bills she had saved. Not much, but enough for bread, enough for milk, enough for a little hope. He counted quickly, nodded, and left without another word. She closed the door and leaned against it, her body sliding down until she sat on the cold floor. The box was empty. Her hands were empty. Her heart felt empty. She pressed her palms to her face and whispered through her sobs, "Lord, now I have nothing, nothing at all." The days that followed felt heavier than ever. Hunger was not her only burden anymore. Now she carried shame. As she walked down the street, holding her children's hands, she could feel the eyes of the neighbors on her. Some pitied her, others judged her, and a few even whispered, "She's always begging. Where is her God now?" Each word cut deeper than a knife. She lowered her head, pretending not to hear, but inside her chest the wounds burned. She longed for someone to speak hope into her heart, but all she received were stares and silence. Every step outside felt like walking under a spotlight that revealed her emptiness to the whole world. At home, the weight pressed even harder. The cupboards were still bare, the pot still cold. She sat on the edge of her bed, her children playing quietly nearby, and felt the loneliness settle over her like a heavy blanket. Her only comfort was to whisper into the emptiness, "Lord, please don't let me walk this road alone. If the world has turned its back, please show me you haven't." She wiped her tears, stood up, and faced her children with a forced smile. They couldn't know how broken she was inside. They needed her strong, even if she was crumbling. That night was the hardest of all. The children lay on thin mattresses, their stomachs empty, their bodies restless. One of the younger ones turned in his sleep, then whispered weakly, "Mom, is there bread?" The words pierced her heart like a blade. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Rest, my love. Tomorrow will be better." Her voice trembled, but the child believed her, because children always believe their mothers. In the corner of the room, another child began to whimper softly. She hurried over, rocking him gently in her arms. "Shh, don't cry," she whispered, though her own tears streamed freely down her cheeks. She swayed back and forth, humming a lullaby, trying to cover the sound of her breaking heart. When they finally drifted back to sleep, she sat alone in the dim light, her hands pressed to her face. She whispered to the silence, "God, I can bear my own hunger, but theirs is too much." Her shoulders shook as she cried quietly, determined not to wake them. The night stretched on endlessly, filled with the sound of her sobs and the empty ache of little stomachs. The hours dragged by. She sat, stood, paced, wept. At times she thought she heard something outside, and her heart leapt with hope. Maybe a knock at the door, maybe someone bringing bread. But when she looked, there was nothing. Only the empty night and the whisper of the wind. Her chest ached from holding so much pain inside. Her legs trembled as she leaned against the wooden table, her tears falling onto its surface. She looked up at the ceiling, her lips quivering. "God, I don't even have the strength to pray. But you see me. You see them. Don't let my children suffer. Please, Lord." Her words dissolved into silence. It was not a prayer of eloquence or strength. It was the broken cry of a heart that had nothing left to give. She laid her head on her arms, exhausted, and let the sobs flow freely. She didn't know it yet, but even in that silence, God was already moving. The first light of dawn slipped through the cracks of the shutters, painting pale lines across the walls. She opened her eyes after a night with little rest, her body stiff from sitting against the wooden chair. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For a brief moment, she hoped maybe the weight on her chest had been only a bad dream. But as soon as she turned her eyes toward the empty shelves, reality struck her again. There was no bread, no milk, no beans, nothing. She sat still for a long time, listening to the silence. Outside, life moved on as if her world had not collapsed. She heard the distant voices of neighbors greeting the morning, the sound of footsteps carrying baskets, the smell of fresh bread drifting faintly through the air. She closed her eyes, fighting against the sting in her chest. They have bread. They have food. Why not us? The children stirred in their beds, their faces pale, their bodies weak from hunger. One of them opened his eyes and whispered, "Mom?" She rushed to his side, brushing his hair back, forcing a smile. "Go back to sleep, my love. It's still early." He nodded, trusting her words, but she knew he would wake soon and ask for food she did not have. She returned to the window and watched the world outside. People walked with baskets filled with fruit, loaves of bread wrapped in paper, fresh vegetables for their families. She imagined the joy of sitting at a table and sharing a meal without worry. She longed for that simple blessing, one she had once taken for granted. Hours dragged by. Morning turned into midday, and still the house remained silent. The children stayed in bed, too weak to play, too tired to cry. She moved from room to room, unable to sit still. Every knock or sound outside made her heart race, but no one came. No neighbor, no friend, no miracle. Only silence. It felt as if heaven itself had turned its face away. Her strength was nearly gone. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she had been wrong to believe. Maybe miracles were for other people. Maybe God had forgotten me. The thought broke her, and sobs shook her body. She had never felt so small, so invisible. And yet, even in that darkness, a flicker of defiance sparked inside her heart. She could not stop believing entirely. Her love for her children demanded that she cling to something. She wiped her eyes, stood slowly, and whispered again into the silence. "Lord, don't let them wake up hungry again. I have nothing left. But you still can." The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat by the table, her head resting on her arms, exhausted from weeping. The children were still lying down, too tired to play, too weak to complain. The silence of the house was unbearable. Each creak of the wood, each sigh of the wind outside seemed louder, heavier, almost mocking. She whispered through cracked lips, "Lord, I can't hold on any longer." Then suddenly she heard it, scratching at the door. A sound so ordinary, and yet in that moment it felt out of place, almost startling. She lifted her head, her heart pounding. Could it be someone at last? She rushed to the door, hope and fear tangled inside her chest. She pulled it open quickly, but no neighbor stood there, no friend, no helping hand. It was Leo, the family's small, scruffy dog. He bounded toward her, his tail wagging, his eyes bright, as if unaware of the heaviness that filled the home. She almost sighed in disappointment, about to step back inside, but then she noticed something unusual. His mouth wasn't empty. He was carrying something. At first, she thought it was a rag or a stick, just another bit of trouble for her to clean up. But as he came closer, he dropped it onto the floor. She froze, her eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. There, lying on the ground, was not a rag, not a stick. It was money, real money. Her knees grew weak. She bent down slowly, trembling, her hands shaking as she picked it up. It was more than a coin. It was a bundle of bills wrapped tightly, clean, untouched. Enough to buy bread, milk, beans, rice. Enough to fill her children's stomachs. She stared at it in disbelief, whispering, This can't be real." The children, awakened by the commotion, ran to her side. "Mom, look what Leo brought!" they shouted, their eyes wide with excitement. She clutched the money to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She fell to her knees, unable to contain the sobs of relief that burst out of her. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you. Even when I had no words left, you heard me." The dog wagged his tail happily, circling around them, unaware that he had just become the messenger of a miracle. The children laughed for the first time in days, their eyes glowing with joy. The heaviness of the house lifted in an instant. Hope had entered again, on 4 legs, with a wagging tail, and a gift no one could explain. That night, the house was transformed. Hours earlier, the table had been bare, the air heavy with silence and sorrow. Now it was filled with the smell of bread and beans, with the laughter of children eating as if they had never tasted food before. She sat at the table watching them, her eyes overflowing with tears. Every bite they took felt like proof that God had not forgotten them. She had walked to the market with trembling hands, clutching the money Leo had brought. Each coin she gave, each loaf of bread she placed into her basket felt unreal, like a dream she was afraid to wake from. As she returned home, her steps grew lighter, her heart swelling with gratitude. And when the children saw the food laid out before them, their eyes sparkled with joy she thought she'd never see again. As they drifted to sleep that night, full and content, she sat in the quiet once more. But this time, the silence was different. It was not the silence of emptiness or despair. It was the silence of peace. She lifted her face toward heaven and whispered, "You heard me." Even when I had no strength to pray, you heard me. From that day forward, something shifted. The fear that had gripped her heart loosened its hold. Opportunities began to appear. A neighbor offered her small cleaning jobs. A friend brought clothes for the children. Life was still hard, but she never again doubted that God saw her. She kept the memory of that night close, a treasure in her soul. The night a dog carried a miracle into her home. Years later, when her children were grown, they would ask, "Mom, how did you keep us fed when times were so hard?" And with a gentle smile, she would answer, "Because God never forgot us. Even when I had nothing left, He made a way. One night when I was too weak to pray, God sent our little dog home with money in his mouth, and that money fed us all." They would laugh, shake their heads in wonder, and the story would be told again and again, a family's testimony of hope. And perhaps tonight, you feel like that mother once did, tired, weary, with nothing left to give. Maybe your prayers feel empty, or maybe you don't even have the strength to pray at all. This story is for you, a reminder that God sees you. He hears even the silent cries of your heart, and when the time is right, His answer will come. It may not arrive the way you expect. It may even come through the most unlikely messenger, but when it comes, you will know it was Him. If this story touched your heart, remember, you are not alone. Hold on to faith, keep trusting, and never forget that hope can arrive when you least expect it. We share these stories because they remind us that miracles are real, that faith still moves mountains, and that God never abandons His children. If you believe in hope, if you believe in miracles, stay with us. Like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Stories of Hope for more true stories that strengthen faith. Because sometimes the miracle you're waiting for might already be on its way.